social relations. But I was going to say also when they realize that there's wealth on one side and then there's
yes, poverty on the other. They might be when there's polarization. But yes, absolutely right. But workers do what? They sometimes, what do, Felipe? They organize. And they struggle. And they struggle against capital, right? And then the capitalists have to justify. Often when capitalists are on the defensive, they have to justify what they're doing. Just as today, in the moments of crisis, these Wall Street, these CEOs of these banks, have you noticed how quiet they are? They have run out of justifications. They have run out of justifications. Yes. But anyway, there are moments, one could argue, where justifications become necessary. But in general, when capitalism is going smoothly, as it does most of the time, it reproduces itself of itself. You don't need these justifications, this customary, this focus on the past, on custom, on tradition. You don't need feasts. No, it reproduces itself of itself because exploitation is invisible. That is Marx's argument. Very good. Now, if we believe this, now we're on the question of universal opulence. If we believe this theory, then is it inconsistent or consistent with Smith? That's the interesting question here. Well, if capitalism expands, then what happens? Capitalism expands, it needs what? It needs more workers. As it needs more workers, demand for workers increases, so what happens? So, workers can then demand more wages. And so, in fact, there is universal opulence. Marx says so. He's completely with Smith. Page 210, 211. I'm going to read to you. I love these passages. This is Marx saying, Smith, you're onto a good thing here. Third paragraph on 210. He says, you're all there. The interests of the capitalist and those of the worker are, therefore, one and the same. Assert the bourgeois and their economists. Indeed, the worker perishes if capital does not employ him. Capital perishes if it does not exploit labor power. And in order to exploit it, it must buy it. The faster capital intended for production, productive capital increases, the more, therefore, industry prospers, the more the bourgeoisie enriches itself, and the better business is. The more workers does the capitalist need, the more clearly does the worker sell himself. Dearly. I'm going to take my specs off this. This is a new stage in my life. Okay. The more dearly, absolutely. I just got too much underlining here. It sounds much better, actually. The more dearly, indeed, dearly, and this must not be forgotten, the more dearly does the worker sell himself, so the higher the wage. The indispensable condition for a tolerable situation of the worker is therefore the fastest possible growth of productive capital. And then on page 211, the conclusion, finally. To say the most favourable condition for wage labour is the most rapid possible growth of productive capital is only to say that the more rapidly the working class increases and enlarges the power that is hostile to it, the wealth that does not belong to it, and that rules over it, the more favourable will be the conditions under which it is allowed to labour anew at increasing bourgeois wealth, at enlarging the power of capital, content with forging for itself the golden chains by which the bourgeoisie drags it in its train. So basically what he's saying here is that the more rapid the development of capitalism, the more rapid the expansion of capital, the greater the need for labour, the greater the bargaining power of labour, and therefore the greater the wage. But he puts it in such a magnificent way. He says, though it is allowed to labour anew at increasing bourgeois wealth, at enlarging the power of capital, content, Matthew, content with forging for itself the golden chains, content to forge the golden chains by which the bourgeoisie drags in its train, content to reproduce the domination that actually allows the working class to actually produce the means of its subsistence, and hopefully increase those wages, the maximum expansion of capital. It sounds like what? Smith, universal opulence. Development of division of labour, expansion of the forces of production, expansion of capital, so it trickles down and everybody gets better off. This is Smith. However, if you read on, then something else enters the story. And Marx then begins to modify and revise that position. What happens in this next part of this wage, labour and capital? What does Marx introduce? Yes. Competition, very good. And what does competition do? Yes, competition among whom? A competition amongst capitalists. And this is the big question. What does competition among capitalists do? What does competition among capitalists do, Jessica? Yes, but what does it do before them? What is it first and foremost, Lauren? Yes, so what happens? All right, there are two capitalists. Where's Isaac? Who's Isaac here? I've lost Isaac. Isaac's not here today. No wonder I've lost him. Okay, Neil and Sam. Two capitalists. Okay, just suppose we've got two capitalists, the two of you. Are you ready? There's Sam and there's Neil. Now, what are you doing? You're competing. What are you competing about?
Produce more so we can sell that at a lower price.
Right, so it's not producing more so you sell it. Well, one way is to produce more, but what is your real technique? How are you going to reduce the price? You're going to introduce what, Neil? How are you going to do that? Pay. All right, one thing is to cut wages. But if he cuts wages, Neil cuts wages, then nobody will work for him.
The other guy cuts wages too.
They're all going to cut wages, are they? Well, that's one way is to cut wages. But even before wages, because wages is alright, that's not going to actually... There's another technique that we all use all the time that Sam and Neil could probably think about too, Sienna. New machinery. We invent a new machinery. Before the machine goes clickety, clickety, click. And now Chris, the machine goes clickety, click, clickety, click, clickety, click. Right, get it? We are producing more things, and therefore Neil has produced a new machine. He is able to, with the same inputs, produce more. And what has Sam got to do? Buy that machine, or else he...
Done.
Or else he dies as a capitalist, or descends into the immiserated working classes. So, but with the new machine, what happens to labour according to Marx? Chelsea? Well, is it specialization? What happens when you introduce new machinery? Yes.
It takes one person to do the job of 2 or 3 people.
Right, so that means that
There's more competition between workers.
there's more competition amongst workers. They've been pushed out. They've increased reserve army of unemployed. There's more competition. And therefore, what happens to the wage? It drops because there's all these people who can replace. But there's something else crucial in the argument here. Something else happens when you introduce this new machine. Chelsea?
The children and women.
Hold on, let's get us a bit down the road. But something more simple. What happens to the character of labour? Yes.
You get alienated from your job.
You definitely get alienated from your job, but you've been alienated all along. Because you never had control over production. There's something else happens, something really crucial. But with new machinery, what happens to the character of work according to Marx? Yes, Lauren?
Almost sort of like stupefaction. It's sort of like
Stupefication, but what has happened? Well, somebody said specialization, but there's what happens to skill? What happens to skill? Yes.
Skill simplified.
Skill's not simple. It's de-skilled. If skill is removed, people become unskilled. They become operators. They just tend the machine. They become unskilled. And that means, Conrad, that they can be easily replaced, because there's no skill. So there is people, you're right, have been pushed into the reserve army unemployed, but at the same time the jobs have been de-skilled, and so they're easily replaced. But if you de-skill people, what happens to the wage? Why did it fall down?
because anyone can do it.
Because anybody can do it, yes, but there's another reason why wages fall with skill, Carol. Cost of production goes down. Why does it go down if it's got de-skilled labour, Chelsea?
Because wages are predicated partially upon the amount of time it takes to cultivate that work.
That's right. And if you skill, it takes time, takes education, takes training to develop the skill. Therefore, you get a higher wage. If it's de-skilled, as Carol says, then the wage falls. Just by virtue of what it takes to reproduce the labour power. So introducing new machines leads to de-skilling, leads to the disempowerment of workers, easily replaced by other workers. Yes. That's what happens. And if one capitalist, Neil, introduces a new machine, goes clickety-clickety-click, and Sam has only got clickety-click, then Sam either introduces a new machine or he goes bankrupt. Everybody has to keep up with, and everybody's panicking. The capitalists are panicking. Why are they panicking? Why are capitalists panicking all the time? Why are they so anxious? Anxious. Why are they so anxious? Yes, what's your name?
Mine?
Yes.
Vijayda.
Vijayda.
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
V-I.
Jada.
No, that's not right. It's V-I-J-A-Y-T-A.
Oh, Vijayta.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yes, Vijay, what so?
Is it because the cost of production is going lower, so the wage is going lower, and then they have to keep introducing new machines? So then, because machines are getting higher, so they're making less profit.
You've been doing this in section? No. Okay, somebody else. Rosa, what was my question, by the way? I can't do two things at once here, obviously. What was my question, Vijayta?
Why are the capitalists
Panic! Oh yes, the most important question. Why are the capitalists panicked? Why are they panicking? Yes.
Because there's less profit, because they have to keep competing for new machines,
Right.
and they're more expensive.
Right, yes indeed, but there's something else why the capitalists are panicking. There are a number of reasons why they're panicking. I mean, we can see around us why they should be panicking. But why, yes. I'm really, Katie.
Is it because if they don't keep up with production, they won't get people to invest in
Well, if they don't keep up with production, they won't survive. See, they don't know. Sam doesn't know what Neil is up to. And there are lots of Neils. The whole room is full of capitalists. Nobody knows who's going to invent the new machine. But even worse than that, what don't they see? What don't they see that the Lord sees? Surplus. They don't know if they're successful in exploiting it. They don't know what they're going to sell their products for on the market because they don't know what the other capitalists are doing. They're terrified that those other capitalists are going to invent new machines or invent new ways of organizing work that will so cheapen the cost of production that they'll be able to sell those cars for a lesser price. And not knowing what to do, they realize they will go broke. They're all panicking. Capitalists live a life of panic. We should be very sympathetic to their plight. Yes. So that's on the one side, there's competition. What are the multiple techniques of actually, in a sense, we've talked about increasing production, but also what are the techniques of lowering wages that capitalists may use? Jason?
Oh, keep staying a little bit after work. You gotta,
Okay. You can apply coercion, get people to do overtime, unpaid overtime, or extend the length of the working day. I mean, that was a strategy they used, of course, in the 19th century, was to extend the length of the working day. And today there are laws against this, but does that stop capitalists? No, why not? Why not? Why not? Very good, but why not? Why don't those laws stop capitalists, Katie?
Well, it only really applies to hourly workers. If you're a wage worker, they don't keep track of how many hours, so you can,
All right, there's one way is to outsource, to be paid for your labor, not your labor time, but for your labor by the piece. But even hourly workers, you must know about this. Surely there must be people here connected to low-wage workers in this state. What happens? Yes.
Well, because even if they have longer hours, the workers, they can't complain about it because they can.
That's right. And do you know who those workers very often are in this state? Those workers are what in this state very often? Well, farmers know. Well, yes, maybe. Immigrants, undocumented immigrants. Of course, immigrants who are very vulnerable, and therefore, indeed, there are enormous labor violations against undocumented immigrants. Or immigrants are particularly weak if they're undocumented, but workers generally are weak if they fear to lose their job. So yes, there are all sorts of labor violations. But what other strategies are there that capitalists can deploy? That Marx talks about on page 209, or whatever, on the last page. What other strategies? Somebody mentioned it on the front here. Was it you, Jenny? Yeah, but increase. But what strategy do capitalists deploy in order to cheapen the wage, to lower the wage? Benefits. You can lose benefits, but there's greater division of labor. But there's some specific technique that they used in the 19th century and perhaps even used today. They employ more than one member of the family. So you distribute the wage among two people in the family. You perhaps employ the father, the mother, and the child. And they together get the wage. So you can, in a sense, third the level of the wage. So you reduce the level of the wage by employing more than one member of the family. That's what happens. That's what happened since the Second World War in this country. You can't survive most families in this country without two earners. That's right. And then it's difficult. Right. What other ways? I'm not letting you go because we got another minute. What other ways are there of reducing wages? What other strategies the capital has? Anybody know? Yes, Simeon?
One group workers against the other.
So in that way you disempower workers. What sort of work? What sort of... all right, that's right. So you generate there's competition from above, but you also generate competition from below amongst workers. But there are ways of dividing the workforce. Along what sort of lines?
Racial,
or
sex.
Race or gender. These are ways in which you can actually divide the working class. But there's also structural ways. If you're a capitalist, where would you go? For... Offshore, well, not surprising jobs disappear, right? They go to countries where the cost of reproduction of labor power is less. On the one hand, capital is mobile outside, and on the other hand, as we suggested, labor is mobile inside. You get immigrants coming here who are indeed perhaps single migrants. The assumption is that the family is behind in Mexico or in Guatemala, and you're paying for what? A single worker, not the family. There are multiple strategies, but if one capitalist introduces these strategies, they all have to. Otherwise they don't survive. You can see now why capitalism is inherently destroying the conditions of its own existence. Read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and Wage, Labour and Capital, and you will understand how to read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Yes.
So, could the I guess the